Alice in Chains. Let's get into the deck profile and explain why these restrictions hurt the deck creation by so much. So, I'm running 2 Magnet Dolls, 3 Bisque Dolls, 3 Jury Dolls, 2 Scissor Arms for the Gimmick Puppet part. Now the Orcust part be 1 World 1, 2 Nightmare, 3 Orcust Mech Knight, 1 Simple Skeleton, and now something a little more odd. It'd be 2 Danger Bigfoot, 1 Thunderbird, and well, any rank 8 extender for Machine, Gear Spring Spirits. Then 3 Condolence Doll, 1 Foolish Burial, 1 Orchestrated Return, 3 Allure of Darkness, 3 Trade-In, 2 Succession, 1 Numeron Force, and 3 Heavy Metal Raiders. So, let's explain why these restrictions, or chains as I call them, limit my creation by so much. Now, how many Dark Machine Ixies are in the game? Not very many. How many of them are rank 8s? Specifically the Gimmick Puppet ones. Now, those are not very great, other than your boy Dengirsu. Those ones are not that great, and their rank ups are not much greater, to be fair. Now, Dengirsu is more or less your boss monster, but this is why these restrictions hurt me by so much, because the extra deck is why it's a little weird. But the main deck. So, Heavy Metal Raiders, why am I running it? Well, mainly for the battle protection, since this deck has no real good main deck protection, which Heavy Metal Raiders isn't really that good to begin with, but battle protection can allow you to sit on a Dreary Doll first turn if you draw Heavy Metal Raiders, which is not awful by comparison. Now, all the draw power. Why? Well, if you know who Alice is, all these chains and stuff do not allow her to pull out the full range of her abilities, but these are all metaphors for why chains and dolls make sense. But the real reason for the draw power is more or less luck, because this deck cannot facilitate its own combos excitingly well. Such is why I run the danger cards to get me more rank 8s on field and give me a +1 hopefully, and Allure of Darkness because the whole deck is darks, Trade-In because there's a shit ton of level 8s, and Orchestrated Return because you don't really need Galatea when you have Simple Skeleton. Because Simple Skeleton can revive her and then you can go into the other one, Long Boy. And now I guess that's more or less the main deck because everything else seems more or less explanatory. Maybe Orcust might need a little explanation, but Nightmare can help you facilitate Druid Doll plays if need be, but you have Condolence Doll and Scissor Arms to hopefully facilitate them for you. But Nightmare occasionally, in case you have a World Wand in hand, you will Nightmare off a Druid Doll or a Magnet Doll to get out Druid Doll. Now that we're through with the main deck, let's go through the extra deck that I explained a little earlier on. Let's expand by a little bit more. Now I'm running 1 Gimmick Puppet Chimera Doll, 1 Galatea, 1 Longirsu, 1 Access Code, 1 Enchained Abomination, 1 Lancelot, Dark Knight of the Underworld, 1 Sampanfa Hold, the Sky Prison, most likely butchered it, 2 Dengirsu, 1 Gimmick Puppet Extremes, 1 Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder, 1 C15 Giant Hunter, 1 C40 Dark Strings, 1 Pain Gainer, and 1 the 7 Sins. Now, 7 Sins and Pain Gainer, or to rank up in, well, Pain Gainers to rank up into 7 Sins, through by using, you know, probably Dengirsu, Lancelot, Sampanfa, any level 8 really, as long as you're not locked behind one of your conditions or chains. 7 Sins. Pretty big boss monster, 4K, and a pretty nasty effect. But you have to wait a turn to use it, so he's not the greatest boss monster to sit on first turn or even second turn. He's more of like the win more card. But I don't see him too often, so I toss him in the deck for a little bit of fun. Now, the Gimmick Puppet extra deck cards I explained a little earlier on, but let's explain by a little bit more. So, obviously Numeron Force is to facilitate the C number cards. And the C number cards are far stronger than the originals, unless you're Giant Grinder. But Puppet Strings into Dark Strings. That's a win condition for you on turn 2. Turn 1? No, it's not. You do not want to make strings on turn 1. Make strings on turn 1, you probably get steamrolled turn 2. But strings puts a string counter on every monster on the field. And Dark Strings destroys all monsters with string counters and deals burn damage to your opponents depending on the original attack of all those monsters, which is pretty good, especially because he has 3,300 attack. So if he had no monsters, he could attack directly for 33, and that's probably a game most of the time. Now, Giant Grinder, he's more or less the card you probably want to go into because he'll destroy the cards. Giant Hunter will destroy another card because it's not putting counters, so they can't dodge the effect, or less likely to dodge the effect. But the Gimmick Puppet cards are not the greatest XC monsters, so that's why we have the Orcust engine to facilitate Dengirsu like there's no tomorrow. Dengirsu is one of the strongest rank 8s in the game, and for good reason. He gives battle protection to all monsters on the field, but he provides decent protection, so you'll want to make him the most often. Now, Sampan Hold, he is a turn 1 monster you will most likely want to try to go into because he prevents your opponent from doing graveyard shenanigans, like special summoning from the graveyard. Also, because he usually gets around 3,000 defense, and that's pretty hard to beat over for most decks, and he gives himself card destruction immunity. He cannot be destroyed by card effects, which is pretty good. Lancelot is not a great negate, but he's a negate nonetheless that I can run in this deck. He'll negate any card that takes its effect, spell, trap, or monster, but your opponent could activate a really bad spell card they don't want, then go into their monster plays, or unless your opponent doesn't read, they'll go into their monster plays, you negate it, and it hopefully stops them, which it most likely won't. Now, Abomination and Access Code. These are if your field more or less gets wiped, because with all your graveyard recursion cards, such as Orcust Engine and the Dreary Dolls, you should be able to make a Link 4 pretty easily. Because with all the draw power, you usually have at least one card in hand, because you can't play all of them, obviously. But usually you should be able to make an Unchained Abomination or an Access Code to hopefully clutch out the game if your board gets wiped. But really, other than that, these guys are just here for that, unless you can make them turn 2 and hopefully beat your opponent that way. Now, Galatea and Longirsu. Longirsu is more or less for the dragoons of the world, because he is cool and says you can send one linked monster from your opponent controls to the graveyard. So, if you play the link arrows properly, he can send Dragoon to the grave without any issue, which is pretty cool. Now, Galatea, more or less to search return, and to facilitate all your banished dark machines, which you will have plenty of, like I've said. But Galatea is more or less to search return activate to hopefully not dump Galatea, hopefully you'll have a Orcust card you don't really want in hand to dump with return to get 2 free draws, and some graveyard setup. Now, Chimera Doll. By far one of the worst links in this deck by a long shot, but it's here just in case if you were to brick like there's no tomorrow. Because usually if you brick, it's usually because you have too many rank 8s in hand and no way to ditch them to the grave. But usually you can get at least 2 monsters on field, so Chimera Doll, hopefully you'll have an extra Gimmick Puppet, which then you can hopefully sit on a Giant Grinder for a turn and hopefully don't lose. Now the side deck. These are more or less other cards you could run besides the Orcust engine or the insane amount of draw power I have, such as the Phantom Knights. Because with Phantom Knight Rusty Bardish, he is a dark monster, thus making him not impossible to summon with his deck, such as Access Code and Unchained Abomination. And Rusty Bardish is pretty strong because he can whip out some Flawed Blades, which is nice negation you do not have the Liberty have in this deck. But since Phantom Knights usually send cards to grave, it meshes kind of well, but I prefer the Orcust variant. Zexal Construction I was running to facilitate the Numeron Force a lot easier, but I usually ran into the scenario where I had 2 Zexal Constructions, already had my Numeron Force in hand, so Zexal Construction was a dead card. Terraforming and Demise the Land is to help you get out your Heavy Metal Raiders faster, but I thought it was just too cheesy and all the draw power allowed me to usually draw into it pretty easily, so I had no use for running it, but in case you want to get out Heavy Metal Raiders a little sooner, you can do so. Well, such as the Metaverse too, but the Babel and the Climax, or the crescendo. But the babble is more or less for in case you want a long Girsu or, activate any Orcust card in your opponent's turn. But I was more or less looking for the long Girsu on your opponent's turn to lock them out of, 2 monster zone on their turn. And the crescendo. The only negates that you could possibly have access to, but usually I found that having a Galatea and a crescendo on field isn't that strong. Usually they have ways of removing her without, actually battling, and you don't really want to negate a lightning storm on just while you have a single Galatea on field. But that's more or less my Alice in Chains deck profile. I do hope you enjoyed, or hopefully expand upon the idea I have presented. But without further ado, I'll see you all in the next one.